All right, so I always go to SAGs, you know that. That's what we have to go to. Now, the evolution part in the SAGs, they've actually outlined in quite a bit of detail, almost like a summary, because there's so much information on evolution and the theory that they need to give schools lots of guidelines so that we don't include too much other stuff or random stuff or, you know, different versions of whatever, okay? So it's on page 2437. So it starts off with origin and the idea about origins. So we need evidence. That's what it says here. It's a scientific theory. It's based on evidence, okay? And we're going to look at lots of evidence. I'm going to show you now. And Darwin was what, he proposed the theory of natural selection, which guides evolution. But then there was another chap. We'll get to that. Alfred Wallace and Darwin's grandfather. So there were ideas being pulled together, and eventually Darwin said, right, I'm putting my theory forward, and he did. Okay? Fundamental aspects of evolution. Macroevolution, patterns, trends. How does this happen? How do you end up with species? It's because of macroevolution, big changes. Then Darwin's theory of natural selection. So, just like those little, what were they, rodents? The ones with the better characteristics survived and passed on their genes. That's natural selection. They say the environment selects for, or there are selection pressures, I wrote here. So if there's a drought and some of them can't cope, then they die out. They don't pass on their genes. If there's a fire, if they're too small, if they're not good at catching food, or if they're easy to catch because they're too slow, that predator that came along and ate the one. So the environment selects for, not really. The environment doesn't choose which ones are going to survive. That to me, it's too, what's the word, personified, choosing something. The environment selects for individuals that have genes that allow them to cope better with a changing environment. All right. So the ones with the genes that allow them to be better adapted to a changing environment are the ones that reproduce and pass on their genes. And that's what his theory of natural selection is about. And he mentioned as well, organisms produce too many offspring. Or not humans, not nowadays, I mean, you know. Like rabbits, lots of rabbits are produced, or lots of those little rodent things, lots of them are produced because some of them will not be strong enough or not have the genes that allow them to cope with that environment. So the environment selects for the ones, survival of the fittest. They're not selecting for, like, picking the ones with the genes that allow them to be better adapted to the environment, reproduce, and pass on those genes. Okay.
So now, those genes, would they be dominant? Because let's say, like,
could be anything.
The organism that's the fittest, right? Let's say he reproduces with an organism that's not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then what would the offspring be?
So you could get heterozygous, is what you're saying. So dominant with recessive, you get heterozygous. But then maybe that recessive gene, if that recessive gene is in other heterozygotes, then maybe that recessive gene is something that allows that organism to be better adapted, like having a straighter tail in a cheetah or a longer neck in a giraffe. So recessive genes could have become the ones that are more common, which allows those organisms to... Yeah, I know, you're trying to tie it into genetics, and we've kind of thought that recessive produces different traits, like blue eyes, green eyes, as opposed to just brown, the original. It leads to variation. It doesn't always lead to something that's bad, like a disease, like albinism, etc. It could become more common. So then we talk about something called genetic drift, where in a population you might have, over time, it's just, I mean, the blue-eyed thing, okay, that more people in that group end up having blue eyes, but in the other group, more people end up having brown eyes. So that's genetic drift. Depends on what's happening, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Then you could get evolution in that group taking place more, and in the animals, then you might be like the finches. So recessive genes resulted in the offspring, and the ones with the bigger beaks, they survived, and that became a species, whereas the ones with small beaks still ate small seeds on some of the islands because that's what the food was, and they became a second species. So, yeah, so I wrote here new niches. Oh wait, we've done that. New niches, separation. We're going to talk about that later, about speciation based on separation. It's called allopatric, don't worry, geopatric, geopatric or allopatric speciation. We'll talk about that later. All right, so I'm just looking here. So Darwin's theory of natural selection. And then it says natural selection operates on variation of inherited characteristics, just like those finches with the different sized beaks. There are other examples as well. We'll talk about the moth. They've got here how leopard got its spots. I have Googled how leopard got its spots, and I've never found a good answer. So I don't know, whoever put these tags together, we still ask every December, like, okay, leopard spots, anyone? Okay. The evolution of the horse's hoof is another example, okay? In the previous section, ma'am, online, you heard about artificial selection or selective breeding. Have you heard? My uncle, just like Darwin's uncle or grandfather, bred pigeons. So he chose that pigeon with a fluffy tail and put it with that one with a nice fluff on his head. Crossed them, new variety. All right, so that's artificial selection, choosing and breeding. So what is natural selection? It's where the environment selects for. Okay, where the environment selects for the organism that has the genes that make it better adapted to a changing environment. All right, and that's where Darwin got his ideas from. All right, that artificial selection mimics natural selection. My uncle choosing pigeons, or Darwin's grandfather or uncle choosing, you end up with new varieties, or eventually new subspecies. Okay, and then we look at crops and domesticated animals. Well, the example of a domesticated animal there that they talked about, where artificial selection or selective breeding, where you choose. What was the example that the video opened up with? Dogs. The wolf is huge. I saw recently a picture of a lady with a wolf and an Alsatian. Those wolves are huge, but you end up with tiny little teacup whatevers. What? Yorkies, yes. They all come from wolves, but it's been selective breeding. I want a dog that will help me do this, and one that will help me, catch, I don't know, in Europe, they used to catch squirrels, I don't know what they used to catch, birds, whatever. It was rabbits, yes. Okay, I should remember that. So, selective breeding. I want this dog. I want one that's going to be nice and warm in Siberia. Okay, so that's selective breeding. It mimics what Darwin came up with. Artificial selecting, mimics what Darwin, he used that, what he saw happening, to come up with his theory of natural selection, that the same thing happens in nature. Nature selects for genes that allow the organism to be better adapted to a changing environment. That's a key phrase. Okay, if you remember that phrase, the environment selects for organisms that have genes that allow them to be better adapted to a changing environment. Genes that allow the organisms to be better adapted to a changing environment. Having genes that allow organisms to be better adapted to a changing environment. Okay, guys at home, you following? Hello, Guillaume, you following? Okay, and then I see a number 4. It's also got, so we're looking at a domesticated animal, like dogs. All right. What about horses? Those big horses and little ones, and race horses, and selective breeding, pigeons, and crops. We've selectively bred what? Grasses to produce wheat, and we've selectively bred another type of grass called teosinte is wheat, and the one to produce millet, corn. Okay, and broccoli and all of those from simple mustard plants. All right, you selected them for their bigger flowers, or bigger this, or bigger that. All right, so that's page 1 of the SAGs, 2438. Candidates should know, what is a species? Variation, what causes variation? I'm picking up words here. Mutations. Okay, Okay, we're not going to mention that now. We're going to talk about inbreeding, outbreeding later. And then some other concepts of evolution, mechanisms of speciation, how was new species formed, like the Galapagos finches. And that's it. And then we get on to hominid studies. So early human-like organisms, or hominids, which gave rise to different groups, and we are the only species of hominids that are surviving, Homo sapiens. All the others died out. Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Australopithecus sediba. You've heard of these, eh? Those nice words. Okay, so if I had to draw that, okay, so what is this called here, that little diagram? It's called a evolutionary tree, or I'm going to show you now, a phylogenetic tree. It says that organisms arise from a common ancestor. So if we are the only humans around now, only, the living organisms we right at the top, and all the other ones have died out. Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Australopithecus sediba, etc. Alright, so we generally show, Homo sapiens, we are still alive, we are present, we're here now. Okay guys, we're going to do this in 2 weeks. I can see we're going to do it. And then we're going to have a week to do the hominid studies. And the hominid studies in the SAGs, they've written a lot there, because there's so much. Our textbook, if we had gone on our trip to Wits for our workshop, that part, in fact, I think the whole of evolution was written by Dr. Ian Mackay. It's on the front here. Where is it now? Mackay, and it's long. So that's why I had, we've got shorter PowerPoints and some little things that I give you just to try, and summaries. I've got summaries to try and bring this together. Okay, that's what we're going to do. All right, so let me show you, so people at home on Moodle, PowerPoint number 1. And bring it up here as well. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. And then I want to show you the PowerPoint that we're using together. Okay, so I'm just going to, this is how your textbook introduces it. So in grade 10, on page 262, they say, well, what do you know? Well, you know from what you did in grade 10. Do you sort of remember what you did in grade 10? Biodiversity, classification, biogeography, continental drift tectonic plates, time scales. Remember, like eras and epochs and periods, and do you remember that? Reading off time. All right, so that's what it starts with on page, it's evolution by natural selection is the topic, and page 263, 262. So this is how they say, well, what do you know? Well, we know there's lots of biodiversity. Where did it all come from? So can we say that we all come from one organism, which might have been a very simple bacteria-like organism which didn't even have a nucleus, was a prokaryote? That's what the evidence says. I'm not saying you have to believe it, but that's what the evidence says. That we all come from a common ancestor, and then there was diversification and natural selection and lots of microevolution, and eventually lots of macroevolutionary events. I need to rub this off now because I think it's too small. I've probably got pictures here. So one common ancestor, bacteria gave rise to all the organisms, I must draw on the same line, that we know today. From amoeba to bacteria today, viruses, everything. Plants, animals, ferns, simple plants, everything. And how could we know that? Well, we can see, remember that video in grade 10 about everything made of cells, and they looked at pond water, and they saw little animalcules, and then they looked, Robert Hooke looked at orchid cells, and he saw, hang on, plant cells. But they've both got this round thing, they've both got a nucleus. So that's where the evidence started, using microscopes and your understanding and trying to figure out why do we have so much biodiversity? But nowadays they use DNA. So they work out the genetic code of organisms, and we make insulin, and gorillas make insulin, and pigs make insulin, and which was the one on the PowerPoint now that they mentioned? Oh, I forget now. I was just reading it. Chimpanzee and human insulin are very similar. Pig insulin as well, but there's another one where it's very different. But doesn't that show that we come from a common ancestor? Because we all have a gene for making insulin, but in the one that I can't remember, different insulin, pig insulin is similar. Pig insulin is, okay, wait, I'm going to do it here. So the one that I can't remember has got very different insulin, like 64% the same as ours. Here's human insulin, and you know when they started when they started treating diabetics with insulin, they actually used pig insulin, all right, because it's actually quite similar to human. So doesn't that show a common ancestor? But we know that gorilla or chimp insulin are very similar to ours. So we can use genetic technology, sequencing of genes, and seeing what proteins, the insulin that's produced, if it's the same, similar, or very different. So that also is evidence for evolution. Okay, all right, let's just see here. So where did it all come from? Has it always been there? Well, yes, we've all got DNA, single cells, unicellular organisms changed, became multicellular, etc. Different niches, different environments, different mutations. There's so many biomes that you read about in grade 10, but I didn't say learn all of them because that's just crazy. All right, and we learned about biodiversity, that some organisms are only found in South Africa, so then they are said to be indigenous. But if they're from another country, like bringing plants and animals in, then they're exotic. But some plants are only found in South Africa and nowhere else in the world, and that's called endemic. Do you remember endemic? So there's lots of biodiversity. Don't write this down. So over time, here's Africa, here's South America, here's Australia. They were once joined, and then before they separated, there were organisms. They were once joined, and these organisms spread. But then when they separated, they became very different. You remember in grade 10, ostriches, rheas, and emus. But they have some kind of common ancestry. We can see that by their similarities and by their DNA and whatever else, enzymes and proteins and whatever. Okay, and because of the movement of the continental drifts, they ended up evolving in their own way in South America. Ostriches in Africa and it's emus in Australia, hey? And rheas in South America, ostriches in Africa, and emus in Australia. But we can see that there's common ancestry. All right, so we introduced a bit in grade 10. Has a variety of living things always been there? How did it develop? Mutation, genes, etc. Has it always been there? Well, in the video, that little pie graph, we said if we think of all the organisms that have survived in time, all of those are gone. 99% are gone. They are extinct. 1% is still alive today. They are extinct. How do we know that there were organisms that have now become extinct? Fossil evidence. But we don't have fossils for everything. Because fossils only form under specific conditions, and they're finding fossils all the time and trying to figure out, what's happening here. Which organism gave rise to the next one? Sometimes there's gaps here. So we need to find one that will kind of link up to this one here. We need to fill in that fossil record to see how related, how organisms are related to one another. Okay, all right. That's what we're going to be looking at as well. How do species originate? Well, we talked about the finches on separate islands, different niches, microevolution, variation. And then they became so different that they became different species. All right. So what we do in grade 10, we talked about fossils. We looked at geological time scales, from how old is the Earth? You remember, 4.6 billion years, or 4,600 million years. You remember that? Age of the Earth. All right. Do you remember? So that's the geological time scale. And if I can I had this very neat, and then I took it home and it got messed up. This shows the geological timescale, but I'll get it ready for the next lesson. It's hard to comprehend 4.6 billion years. It's very hard. Okay? There's been lots of extinctions. Do you remember in grade 10? There were 5 mass extinctions, and there was the Cambrian explosion, where lots of organisms arose for whatever reason. Maybe the environment had nice temperatures, lots of oxygen, not too much CO2. But there's been 5 mass extinctions because of ice ages, volcanic eruptions, whatever. Okay, that's what they can see in the fossil record. All right? How do we, well, there's so much biodiversity, we actually classify everything and give them that binomial naming system. So our binomial name is Homo sapiens. And if you type it, well, if you write it in italics, and if you type it, you underline. So it's genus and species. So there are lots of hominids, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, etc. We are the only genus or species of the genus Homo left. Okay. All right, let's see here. Okay, it talks about continental biogeography. You've got rheas in South America, ostriches here, emus. They separated in different biogeographical areas because of continental drift. You know what a species is, yes? Same area, same population, interbreed, or could be different populations, interbreed, produce fertile offspring. All right? What is a population? A group of individuals of the population. A herd of, think of the collective pronouns. Collective pronouns? Herd of buck. A group of individuals of the same species living in the same environment area. Okay? And there's variation. You're going to get buck with long faces, short faces, sharp ears, pointy ears, flat ears, whatever. I'm exaggerating. And they arise by mutations, microevolution. They are well adapted to the environment. The ones that can hear better can run away before the lion gets there. The ones that faster, they can run away. All right? Phylogenetic trees, that's what I've drawn there. Evolutionary relatedness. All right, to try and figure out how everything is related. Like over here, it's inferred relationships based on the evidence. All right, try and look at their phylogeny. How are they related to one another based on their similarities and differences in their physical makeup? What do you see? As well as what are their genetic similarities and differences. So I've kind of explained it already. So which organisms here are most closely related? Which groups? Which species? C and D and A and B. But A and D are very distantly related. It's like comparing a frog to a fish. But they do have a common ancestor because they're vertebrates. All right. And these are the common ancestors at each dividing branch. Okay. So C, D, and E share a more distant common ancestor, but C and D are more closely related because they share a more recent common ancestor. They evolved, not so far back. But the common ancestor number 2 here evolved much earlier on. And that's how you read them. Are there any questions there? Guys at home? Okay, you can put your marks on, I don't mind. Yeah? All right, so that's that diagram. Okay, so even in our families, we draw up family trees and we can go back to great-great-great-great-great-grandparents and try and see who looks like who. All right, all the variation, etc. Or like Queen Victoria's family, the passing on of that hemophilia. So phylogenetic is showing relatedness between organisms. There's a spelling mistake. Phylogenetic. All right, so I think we've done this. So there's the common ancestor of the land plants, and these are the descendants. Okay, that's the common ancestor. The common ancestor was a simpler plant, and it gave rise way back when to mosses, which are also simple. They don't have xylem and phloem. And ferns, which are more complex but also don't have xylem and phloem. 2, the seed, these produce spores. Don't worry, this is grade 11 that we don't have to do. And then you get the seed-bearing plants. The cone, ones that make cones and the ones that make flowers, and you've heard of monocots and dicots. Alright, so there's little milestones along the way. So what was the milestone? What did this common ancestor have that animals didn't? I didn't know I was going to explain it like this, but I'm going with it. What did this common ancestor have that the lion giving to animals didn't? Come on guys, it's easy. People at home. What do plants have? Well, two things maybe. Plants, green, chloroplast. So the milestone, alright, is that these guys have chlorophyll, but the lion giving to animals, because remember we all come from a common ancestor, the lion giving rise to animals didn't have chloroplast. So chloroplast. Then mosses are very small, they're tiny, tiny leaves, tiny little roots. Alright? So they're very simple. Then there might be another milestone here, like, ferns have got rhizomes and very complex multicellular or multi-lobed leaves. So that could have been a milestone. That these have all got very complex leaves. Those are very simple. Moss leaves are thin, one cell layer. Leaves of ferns and conifers and flowering plants have got lots of plant tissues. Do you remember plant tissues? Doing that with the great teams now. But then here, and these ones actually make spores. But hang on, conifers and flowering plants, they don't make spores, they make seeds. Milestone. In cones, these ones make seeds but in flowers. Then you get monocots and dicots, different kind of flowering plants. More advanced, look there, they only arose more recent in evolutionary history, more recently. Okay. So, a phylogenetic tree has got a time scale. You can see which organisms evolved more in the distant past or more recently. All right, we'll have a look at those worksheets I gave you just now. And we talk about MYA or MY, millions of years, or MYA, millions of years ago. Because that's it. Evolution has, of organisms from simple bacteria has taken place. The evidence shows that it has taken place over millions of years. All right, and I'll use my little string thing when I can untangle it to give you an idea. That will be in the next lesson. All right, so that we've done. Now, these groupings are called clades. You don't need to know the word. Clades. It's a cladogram. It's showing grouping. It's a phylogenetic tree showing grouping over time. So that's a clade. Alright, with that common ancestor. But this is a smaller clade, a smaller group of evolutionary related organisms with a more recent common ancestor. We don't really use the word clade in the matric syllabus, but if you see it, don't get confused. Alright? So there's the speciation event giving rise to B and C. Alright, so here's a proper phylogenetic tree, and these are those milestones I was talking about. So in the vertebrates, vertebrae differentiated these organisms from the invertebrates like the insects and the jellyfish and so on. Sharks, only have a cartilaginous skeleton. But then there was the development of bone, the ossification of cartilage, grade 10 tissues, animal tissues. Alright? But you had fish, alright, like goldfish, with the little bony spikes in their fins, and they were in water, and then some organisms, I'll show you on the PowerPoint later, some organisms evolved and moved onto land because they had 4 limbs. Alright, amphibians, they don't lay their eggs, they don't have amniotic eggs, you've done this. They don't have eggs surrounded by a shell, they lay their eggs in water, jelly-like eggs. Then the amniotic egg allowed these organisms to move onto land. They took the pond with them. Did you see that video? I must let you watch that video about the amniotic egg. It's so cute. I must actually upload it. Alright, so the amniotic egg, frogs lay their little jelly eggs in the water, but if you move onto land, you can't lay jelly eggs on land because they're going to dehydrate. So, all of these with amniotic eggs took the pond with them and had a shell around the eggs. So now they could lay on terrestrial land. Okay? But then you've got animals with hair, and so we here, hey, rodents, rabbits, mammals, and these are all mammals. Why are they separated in here? Oh, because they're dividing up into rodents with different teeth to primates like us, you know, with, we are omnivores, etc. Okay, I'm not going to go into that now. So we've all got hair, but crocodiles, etc. have got scales, and birds are grouped with dinosaurs because birds have scales, and some scales developed into feathers. Did you know that? All right. Okay, so that's how we read off the tree. What do they have that is different? And you can look at those questions. Page 264, and that's from grade 10, a geological time scale. This is a bit dark. Maybe we can see. Here's just showing. In fact, I think this one's also in Mrs. Page's PowerPoint. So all the way, this one, times 0. Look where it starts. So that's times 0. I'll just read off for the people at home, and no, it's not. That's recent. This is old, of course. Here's bacteria, simple organisms, unicells, multicellular, plant-like, animals, insects, dinosaurs, etc., etc. And then you just got to be able to read off. So yes, the Earth is 4,600 million years old, or 4.6 billion years old. And we can see here that soft-bodied animals appeared about 542 million years ago. And then first reptiles, dinosaurs, etc., etc. But I want us to use my little, this is quite nice to get an idea of that. Who has been to Marapeng? And as you walk down to the boat, I don't know if it's still like that, and on that wall, they've got the time scale from nothing, earth, water, fire, and wind, and then first unicells, multicells, plants, animals, humans, and then you get on the boat. I think it's something like that. Okay, so we're going to have a look at that. That's grade 10 work. And I kind of feel like I want to stop here. Oh, I've got a few here. So in grade 10 we talked about how fossils are formed, because that's evidence for evolution. We're finding so many fossils of organisms that are extinct, and they're found in different layers called strata, and strata are sedimentary rocks, and the law of superposition. Do you remember that? Law of superposition is that you dig up here, you're going to find more recent fossils, ones that died out more recently, but if you dig further down, you're going to find fossils of things that lived long ago. They're much older, like trilobites and ammonites. Do you remember those words? Do you remember that from grade 10? I've got those fossils, you must get them out. And then early fish and dinosaurs, etc. And I haven't got the plants here. So more recent near the top, died out more recently. Older, lived millions of years ago, would be found in the deeper layers of rock. The law of superposition. Upper strata, younger fossils, more complex. They've had more time to evolve. Lower strata, the older fossils, more primitive. Okay. And not everything fossilizes, remember that. All right, and there's the evolution of the horse, but just showing how, I'm not going to do it all now, it's in the other PowerPoint. So, how they evolved from a little forest-dwelling animal to become something that is very large and can run the plains, and how their feet and how their teeth change. Over, look at this, from the Cretaceous all the way up until recent, which is the Pleistocene. Okay, if you don't need to know these words, guys, I don't know them. Cannot read them. Are we happy? Okay, so I'm going to stop this video now.